So today we're learning the Hechaltzu of the Rebbe Rashab, the Maamar the Rebbe Rashab said in 1898, and we're on page 138, 139 in the one lessons in Hechaltzu. Introduction to chapters 18 to 20. Those that have a previous edition would be page 133. Let me read this. There is a common saying, knowing the ailment is half the cure. Only when an ailment is recognized and understood can it be treated. Nevertheless, this awareness is only half, in italics, the cure. There must also be a working therapeutic remedy for healing to occur. In the first 17 chapters of Hechaltzu, the Rebbe Rashab identified the ailment, highlighting the problem of yeshus, of ego, and the baseless hatred that results from it, and explaining how harmful those characteristics can be to a person and to a community. From chapter 18 onward, the Rebbe Rashab spells out the remedy. This he does by following a classic axiom in Chasidus. Every concept in Avodah, in hands on divine service, has a parallel in Haskalah, the abstract comprehension of godliness. A thorough comprehension of the relevant concept in the abstract inspires and guides its practical application in Avodah. This, Hillel, I would say, is an axiom, an ethos of Chabad, this last sentence, that by understanding and really comprehending and learning, like you learn a piece of Gemara where you want to understand the Pshat, the Rashi and Tosfos, understanding the spiritual aspect of the issue on hand, and therefore that includes knowing somewhat of what Kabbalah says about it and what Chasidus says, because Kabbalah and Chasidus are the two parts of the Torah that delve into the spiritual in the sense of the Ruchnius, but the mechanics of the Ruchnius. Kabbalah is pure mechanics. Chasidus applies the mechanics to Chabad Chasidus in an intellectual way. So yesh mi'ayin. Yesh mi'ayin, the concept is not a chidush of Chasidus. Yesh mi'ayin is brought in Sefer Yetzirah and other places, etc., which is books of Kabbalah, right? Memala kol almim, Seviv kol almim, Ak, Adam Kadmon, levels. All of that's found in Kabbalah, in the Zohar HaKadosh, and Kisvei Arizal. And the Zohar HaKadosh and the Kisvei Arizal, Reb Chaim Vital's explanation of all these things, as much as the Ramak, Moshe Cordovero, in Tomer Dvorah, etc., kind of systemize Kabbalah, but it's still Kabbalah. It still very much feels Kabbalistic. Then comes along Chasidus, the Baal Shem Tov and his Talmidim, and they take that and they break it down more in Avodas Hashem. Most of the Talmidim, as we know, did it through the emphasis on the Avodah, on the heart, i.e. Chagas Chasidim. In the Chabad world, we call the other Chasidim Chagas Chasidim. Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, meaning the emotional Chasidim. One with Chesed, one with Gvura, one with Tiferes, different orientations, but all an orientation of emotions. Chabad emphasizes the Chochmah Bina Das. And this is what he said over here at the end of this last second paragraph, that the understanding, the parallel of the issue of avodah that we get to that we're dealing with. So, for example, Hillel, in this case, Yeshus and Sinas China, and how to get rid of it, right? So the Rashab will now go up, not go down. He'll climb upward. He's taking us for a ride into the Godhead. And the Alter Rebbe believes that we, common people, who are not tzaddikim, regular people, regular Yidden, we can understand more about the Godhead, how Hashem operates. And not to shy away from it and say, wait. Again, we're not learning Kabbalah now. We're learning Chasidus. And this is what he means here. So this line, I thought, this sentence brought out very well the Chabad ethos. Continuing paragraph 3.
Yeah, thank you. I agree. It's very concise.
Yes. After defining Yeshus as the antithesis of the oneness of God's name Havaya, Yud Kei Vav Kei, which we learned about before, the Rebbe Rashab devotes the following chapters to showing how unity can coexist with diversity. Not only does he call for oneness, he explains the spiritual dynamics that make it possible. In this way, he provides us with guidelines upon which we can model such unity in our divine service. Hashem's name, Havaya, is identified with godliness of an utterly transcendent nature. By contrast, the name Elohim is identified with the godliness that permeates the world, bringing it into being and granting it life. Thus, the name Elohim is the source of the plurality that pervades the created realms. To enable a plurality of created beings, the divine energy filtered through the name Elohim must vary. It must be enclosed within each created being and adapted to it according to its specific nature. And because the name Elohim represents the various life forces within each element of existence, that name appears in a plural form, Elohim, not Elokai, Elohim. By contrast, Hashem's name, Havaya, is transcendent. It reflects a level of existence at which no distinction between entities is apparent. That's why it is singular. Nevertheless, it is the name Havaya that is the ultimate source of all existence. If so, it is clear that diversity also exists in potentia within the name Havaya itself. Indeed, each of its 4 letters represents a distinct spiritual dynamic and is manifest in one of the 4 spiritual rules of Atzilus, Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya. These different levels define the structure of all existence. However, in the name of Havaya, all 4 levels exist in a state of perfect synthesis and unity. So here, this is a very important point. It's not the pshat that, from the perspective of Havaya, plurality doesn't exist. When we say that it exists in potentia, then it exists. It's not in manifest, but it's in potentia. So that's what he's saying. Because as soon as you say Yud Kei Vav Kei, you're addressing the Yud Kei Vav Kei of what? Yud Kei Vav Kei as it will be ultimately perceived in the world. So the Chiddush of Havaya is, as he says here so eloquently, it's not that it doesn't exist, it exists in potentia, and therefore, however, it's in perfect synthesis and unity. And that is the ultimate. And Hillel, that's the difference between Hashem Echad and Hashem Yachid. I'm sure you've learned this, Chasidus. Yachid means the only one, right? Echad means one, which means you can count 2 and 3. And we say it precisely. And which is greater? Not Yachid, Echad. Why? Because Yachid, excludes 2 and 3 and 4. It excludes plurality. No, okay, big deal. It's like, I'm going to lock myself away somewhere and not have anything to do with the world. The expression they would use, and they still use sometimes, a tzaddik in pelts. You've heard the expression, right? The tzaddik, a pelts is in Russia, they had these fur, heavy coats for the winter. And he puts it on, and he covers himself in this, a person does so, and he doesn't think about everyone else who is freezing cold. But he has the pelts on him. That's what a tzaddik is. So what the expression is, he's a tzaddik in pelts. In other words, he's a self-serving tzaddik, which means he's an egotist. Okay? Yochid, as great as Yochid, it's a tzaddik in pelts. Listen, halavai, we first should reach Yochid and then get to Echad, but we're talking about in concept. Yochid is exclusive of plurality. What's the chiddush of Echad? There's Dalet, sides of the world, Ches, 7 heavens and the earth, and they're all incorporated in Aleph of Echad. Oh, so when we say that, that means there is Dalet and there is Ches, and they're both incorporated in potentia in Aleph. That's a chiddush. That means that the energy is so powerful, and that it's able to tolerate, and more than tolerate, to include in a, tolerate's not the right word, to include in a positive way the Ches and the Dalet, and to bring unity into that. That's a tremendous chiddush. So it's, for a CEO of a company to exclude people who aren't kind of in his way of thinking is not a big deal, because you're the boss. You could do it. The greater chiddush is to bring people in who don't have your way of thinking, and yet somehow you have them all be part of the company and go along with the whatever you feel needs to be. So that's the chiddush of Echad. So the Rebbe says over here, the note is saying here that that's the gewaldigkeit, the chiddush, the novelty of Havaya versus Elokim. Elokim is the energy of Hashem that is guided by plurality. In other words, plurality controls Elokim in a way. How much godliness is given to the world from the perspective of Elokim, whatever the subject matter requires and needs or doesn't need. Havaya is not, the subject matter doesn't decide, buddy. I decide, the Yudke Vovke, but I decide taking you into consideration into my world. I bring you into my world. And in my world, I find a way of you also manifesting my world. That's Yudke Vovke. Let's continue. Since the life energy emanating from God's name, Havaya, passes through the name Elokim, Hashem Elokim, the implicit diversity becomes actually revealed. However, because Havaya and Elokim are truly one, even the distinct created beings whose separate identities stem from the filter of Elokim are characterized by the absolute oneness of the name Havaya. So just to clarify a point that he says here, when Yud K Vav K goes through the filter of Elokim, that's when we have manifestation. Yud K Vav K on its own, Hillel, is too awesome to manifest. Right? But Elokim is that energy of Hashem that lends itself to manifestation. So you would think that Yud K Vav K, when it goes through Elokim, it's then shackled by Elokim. And what we say is no, Hashem hu Elokim. That ultimately, and this is the Chidush and the Avodah, is to realize that yes, Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei, needs Elokim for manifestation. But manifestation shouldn't be the limitation of Yud Kei Vav Kei. You hear the Chiddush? In other words, it's like I have to depend on you for whatever. Yet, right, that thing that I have to depend on you for whatever that is shouldn't define me. Doesn't define me. Yud Kei Vav Kei is not defined by manifestation. Because as soon as you say Yud Kei Vav Kei is defined by manifestation, it's no longer Yud Kei Vav Kei. Havaya, and let's continue the last sentence. And by saying Havaya Echod in the Shema, we highlight the unity of all created beings. That's what we're saying, Hillel. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echod. What does Hashem Echod refer to? We highlight the unity of all created beings, the fact that in essence, they are all permeated by the singularity of God's essence. That's the novelty of Hashem Echod over even Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu. In the Hashem Elokeinu part of the Shema, we don't emphasize the singularity of Havaya as it manifests in Elokim. Hashem Elokeinu, you would say, is the Elokim kind of having the upper hand over Yud Kei Vav Kei. In other words, the manifestation is Ikar, and the Yud Kei Vav Kei is ancillary, is Tofel. Whereas in Hashem Echod, there we say that there's Ches and Dalet, they're all included in the Aleph, which is in the Yud Kei Vav Kei. So the Hashem Echod is a lot more deeper and powerful, and ultimately more the Kavanah, the purpose. Now, although this was just a written note by the publishers, this idea over here, good morning, Velvel, good day, Velvel. This idea over here is a very important and discussed idea in Chabad Chasidus at length, in discourses. This Maamar that we're learning is one of the places where it's discussed at length. There's another Maamar, maybe. What?
Do you know the person who did this, Eliyahu Tauger?
Of course I know him. He lives today in Boca Raton. He used to live in Har Nof. And before that, in Brooklyn. He's a genius.
Okay.
I know him, yeah. So,
yes,
but I just want to say that there's another Maamar of the Rebbe Rashab where this is discussed, if my memory serves me well, from my youth years, and that is the Maamar called the Yodaita Moskova. The Maamar was said by the Rebbe Rashab 2 years early in Tofresh Nun Zayin in 1896, probably in the English date.
2 years before this one.
Because this was said in 1898. This one was said in 1896 in Hebrew, Tov Reish Nun Zayin, which would be 1897. I don't remember now what parsha it was, so it's 96 or 97. But be that as may, it was said in Moscow. So by Hasidim, it became known as V'yodaita Moskove. Moskove is, I guess, the Yiddish, or I don't know, the Velvet could tell us if that's the way the Russians pronounce it, but that's the Maamar. And in that Maamar, he talks, I believe, also about this concept of Hashem and Elokim, the energy of each, and in a sense the difference, and then their synthesis. And he brings other concepts, Oyer and Keli, Elumatikin, Elumatoyu. But here,
the other man who was from the Rashab was the one on Chinuch, right?
But that's a different. It's not like a Maamar. It wasn't a Maamar Chasidus. It was an essay on education.
Okay.
What?
Explain the difference.
The difference is a Maamar Chasidus in Chabad tradition. The belief is a Rebbe, a Chabad Rebbe, who's saying a Maamar Chasidus is inspired by Hashem, and Shechina medaber mitoch grono, and it comes out through the mouth of the tzaddik, of the nosi. So it's not to be looked at as a pilpul, a dissertation. In other words, there can be things in a Maamar that maybe on the face of it doesn't correspond with maybe a Rashi, a this, a that, a piece, right? Because that's not the focus of the Maamar. The Maamar is elikus, it's divinity. It's divinity as the divine inspires the tzaddik, who then releases it by reciting it, or at times writing it, okay? Later on, the people who hear it, translate it and transcribe it, that's another experience. That is not equal to the actual recitation coming from the holy mouth of the tzaddik. That's why many times when I'm asked to chazer to review a Maamar Chasidus in shul, in different shuls over my life, if it's a Maamar that the Rebbe said, I will listen. We have at Chabad.org, they have the Maamarim. I'll listen to the Rebbe's voice a few times if I can, to remember certain key words that I hear him emphasize, so that when I review it, I can share that. And B, to us, to Chabad Chassidim, that is the emes, right? Once it's already transcribed, it's going through the filter of the transcriber. Now, in every generation, there were great Chassidim, including our generation of Yoel Khan, who were completely dedicated and had the head and memory and understood the Maamar the correct way. Just like the Alter Rebbe, that the Tzemach Tzedek writes on the cover page of the Kutei Torah, which you've learned, both of you. If you take a look on the cover page, it says there, the Alter Rebbe did not write his own Maamarim. Do you know that? He said the Maamarim, and his brothers, and one or two Hasidim, they put it in writing. They wrote down, and the Tzemach Tzedek says that they were able and trustworthy and to write down what they heard. In other words, they didn't add their own words. Because if they add their own words, it's not the Rebbe's Maamar. It might be a very nice dissertation. It's not divine. So we are now making it, I'm glad you brought this up, although it's a tangential point, but we're making a distinction between elikus, which in English is divinity, and non-elikus, which is gewaldik, great mind, but not divine. So the Maamar, a Maamar Chasidus in Chabad tradition, is a divine communication. The Kuntris Achinuch V'Adrocha was never said as a Maamar. It was never said. It was a written document that the Rashab saw was necessary for his yeshiva. He had teachers, he had students, and in particular, he introduced Chabad Chasidus in a way that it belongs in a yeshiva curriculum, which never had been done before, right? So he saw that he needs to really explain it. So the Kuntris Achinuch V'Adrocha that you referred to is I call it an essay that's very organized and very important, but it's not not a Maamar Chasidus. Now, truth be told, it could be that sometimes it's called that. I don't recall. I have to look at the heading, and then I have to verify if the Rebbe himself wrote the heading. But to my knowledge, at this point, it's an essay written. So I don't believe it has that. It's not that divinity that we're talking about, where a Rebbe reveals a Maamar. In other words, and here's another point. Our tradition believes that when a Rebbe said a Maamar Chasidus, he includes in there everything you need at that time and the world needs, and he reveals it. And sometimes we pick it up, and sometimes we don't pick it up. Probably more times than others we don't. But in other words, it's the way Hashem says to the tzaddik, all subconsciously, like, this, the world needs this right now. And he has it go through the tzaddik, and then, and the story, Hillel, and I'll finish with this, not with the story, but about the story in 1953, when Stalin died. The Rebbe was sitting in Brooklyn, Purim, and he said two Maamorim, and they say that around the time when he said the Maamar, and he told over the story of Hurrah, hooray, hooray, hurrah, hurrah, hurrah. The Lubavitcher Rebbe seems to making theatrics in 770 Brooklyn, Crown Heights. Like, what is this, a show? It's Purim? This is the Lubavitcher Rebbe's way of doing Purim shtick? Chabad, that wasn't Chabad's style of Purim, by the way. I told you that. Rabbi Yoel once said, leave the shtick for Tisha B'Av and the seriousness for Purim. Purim and Chabad wasn't a day of silliness. It's a happy day, but it's not a day of making yourself a fool, and in all manners. So the Rebbe surely didn't, do theatrics, but nevertheless he did that. And it was at that time that Stalin dropped dead. Stalin was announced dead, right? So again, what we believe, and no one can prove it to you, we can just give the facts and then take it the way it is, that Hashem wanted Stalin to die around then. And he was Tzayra Yehudim. He was an enemy making such problems. So Hashem revealed a certain oir, went through the Maamar Chasidus, and the results were the results. And I personally had another story, which I've told you, and I believe it's the same thing, even though it wasn't a Maamar. When we were in Marin County, and Hillel knows about Marin County, we had a Chabad house, a shul, and our neighbors, some were, they were very upset because there wasn't even a church in the 538 planned community. There's no church, and there's going to be a shul. And it was a big fight, okay? I'm not going to go into the details. I've shared them with you some anyway. I wrote about it. I have a whole book about it called Chabad House. So one Sunday, the Rebbe was giving out dollars, and my father, you've met Velvel, He's a Jew from Romania. He never landed in this country. So the way he speaks to the Rebbe, and it's different than us Americans. It's like, and also where he comes from, it's like, a Rebbe, you talk to him. And you exchange. Us Americans, we were trained, by our teachers, like, the reverence. You keep quiet, you know what I'm saying? So my father, it bends over with me when the Rebbe is giving us dollars. We have this on video. And he says to my father, my son, who has a Chabad house, has terrible problems that is being made. I don't know if he said by a woman who's always finding. She was the secretary for the Homeowners Association, and whenever she was able to make trouble for us, she did by writing in their weekly newspaper, Chabad kids threw the stones into the pool. Chabad children stepped on the flowers. This was egging on the people. So people read that. Chabad are with such terrible people, right? So my father, I don't know if he got into the details. I don't think he did. He just said, my son's having, in Yiddish, gefährliche Tzuris, which means terrible tzuros. And he's asking the Rebbe for a bracha. So the Rebbe gave a bracha. The Rebbe gave us a bracha. That was Sunday. I came back to California, I think on Tuesday or Wednesday, I think Wednesday. I got off the plane, I called over, and they said, my secretary, whoever, said to me, did you hear the news? I said, what news? The secretary had a massive heart attack yesterday and she died. 43 years old. 2 days after the Rebbe gave the bracha. Okay. Now, these are the facts. Whether one believes it's because of the Rebbe's bracha or not, that's everyone's choice. But the fact is that she was 43. Fact is she had a massive heart attack, and she died 2 days after the Rebbe, right? So the Rebbe didn't curse her. The Rebbe gave a bracha after hearing the tzaras that I'm having for the Chabad house. And it was really her who was the core figure. Again, and I have to check, listen, I'm not sure. My father said there's a lady that's causing it. It might have been that he didn't even say that. But that's the bottom line. So what am I saying? What I'm saying is that even words that come out of a tzaddik don't have to be, hey, I'm going to curse this. By the way, there were certain tzaddikim, Hillel, that did use this, kind of cursing the enemy. They say the Ribnitzer Rebbe, with different stories of that was not Jewish and godly. He would write the name and throw it into fire, and the person was gone. There's such stories. But this wasn't the Rebbe's approach. It wasn't really the Lubavitch approach. The approach was to be mamshich oir, to draw down light. And the more light you draw down, Hashem will keep score and do this. So this is a little bit to explain the difference between Havaya and Elokim. And on one hand, how Hashem Echad is the inclusion of Ches and Dalet in the Aleph, which means that the Yud Kei Vav Kei is the synthesis of plurality. That's the idea. Chevra, we'll learn tomorrow. Have a great day. Seid gesund.
I won't be here tomorrow, but I hope to be here Wednesday.
Okay, good. Seid gesund. We'll see you. Drive safely.
Yeah,
Shalom.
thank you so much.
Bye-bye. Take
Thank
care.
you.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
Bye-bye.